Hello everybody and welcome back to my glorious return on my channel after disappearing for some 2 months. They weren't the best 2 months for me. August was a huge reading slump and my reading got very chaotic. I started reading a lot of books, haven't finished any of them, and I felt really, I don't know, demotivated. What can you say about a book you haven't finished? September kind of flied by. I also started going back to work because the summer holiday was over for children, so that wasn't pretty good either. In October, my reading picked up a little bit, but for university, I had to read a lot of essays and stuff like that, so not necessarily novels or things I could talk about. So I basically took a huge break, but I'm back with, I would say, my arch enemy, Donna Tartt and the Secret History. If you've watched my video where I talk about books I don't like, in that video I mentioned this book and I said that I have beef with it. I also said that I didn't finish it, and after posting that video, I felt like this book was hanging over my head and I felt guilty for not having finished it. I thought maybe I was unfair with this novel, first because I haven't completed it, I haven't finished it. So how much can you say about a book you haven't finished? There's always that possibility that things can change, especially in 200 pages. There's a lot of space for things to change. Then the second thing is I first read this or started reading this novel, I don't know, like 5 years ago. So my memory, if you've watched other videos, you'll see that my memory when it comes to books I've read a few years back, it's not that great. I don't remember a whole lot. There was this meme that I don't remember what happened, but I do remember the vibe. That's pretty much it for me as well. So I felt kind of guilty for being so harsh with this novel, given the circumstances. And I thought, alright, this is a very popular novel. I'm not one to go for mainstream books, mainly because they don't really interest me. However, this novel, from the description and from the premises, sounds like something that I would really love. And I thought, well, if I was unfair, let me give it another try. Let me read it in its entirety this time, with an open mind, having kind of high expectations because it's quite praised. So let's try it again, let's read it and then draw our conclusions. And this time they will be fair conclusions because I will have completed it, I have a fresh memory, and so on. And my conclusion after having done this, and I'll show you again the book, you'll see it has a lot of sticky notes. So I did complete it. It's I got this second hand, so I know it doesn't look the best, but it's readable. I think this is bad book. I think there is some potential. However, this book for me falls flat. And from, let's say, a more objective perspective, if you try to analyze it, or at least for me, I tried to analyze it, and I came to the conclusion that it's lazily built, maybe, or without any kind of real thought behind it. She just throw things at the reader that sound intellectual, that may seem smart, but if you are to peel back the layers and try to dig deeper into the story and into the characters, there's nothing much to find there. So this is my overall conclusion. However, because I am a student of literature, and because I want to be fair, my attempt for this video is to try to analyze this book from as objective as a standpoint as possible. When it comes to taste, that's not really debatable. People like what they're going to like, and I'm not here to say, oh, you shouldn't like this novel because it's bad. Of course, there are a lot of reasons why we like things, and I have some novels that I really like as much as I love intellectual and high literature. I love John Green, even though maybe his books are not the best when you are to objectively analyze them. And it's the same with this novel. Of course, if you like it for whatever reason, uh, I'm not going to debate why you shouldn't like it, but I want to go through it with a more analytical eye and kind of prove to you why it's not that it's not that deep as it claims to be and it wants to be. I will say, I think that if I had read this when I was in high school, it would have probably been one of my favorite novels. But at the same time, I don't trust my taste from high school because this summer I tried to reread one of my favorite books when I was a teenager, and I just couldn't get through it because it was too cringy. I definitely think this book would have been my favorite as a high schooler, but now after having been through university studying literature, being in my master's degree, and having this ability to analyze things more objectively, let's say, I cannot say that this is a good book, especially when it's compared to huge classics like I've seen it compared to Dostoevsky. I want to start by saying that obviously everything is relative. If you are to put this book next to classics like Crime and Punishment, I think it does a huge disservice to the novel, because compared to Dostoevsky's novel, this just feels like child's play. On the other hand, if you compare it to other mainstream novels like novel by Colin Hoover, this is truly a masterpiece. So it depends a lot on the perspective, but I don't want to compare it to the worst of the worst. I want to compare it to the best of the best, because that's what it pretends to be. It pretends to be this modern classic. After this very long introduction, let's get into the analysis itself. So the main problem I think I have with this novel is that Tartt doesn't follow the basic rule in fiction writing, which is show not tell. So there are a lot of instances where she tells us things without us, the readers, really being able to see it in, I don't know, how the characters interact, how they think, how they act. So when she reveals stuff, it almost feel like it comes out of nowhere. I want to start this from one of the descriptions that you'll find about this novel, and the description I first read that made me intrigued. And the description goes like this. So I have my laptop here, I'll read from it. Under the influence of their charismatic classics professor, a group of clever, eccentric misfits at an elite New England college discover a way of thinking and living that is a world away from the humdrum existence of their contemporaries. But when they go beyond the boundaries of normal morality, their lives are changed profoundly and forever. So this is the premise of the novel. You have this professor that takes these misfits, these outsiders, let's say. He creates a group around him, trying to teach them and kind of impose um, different ideas than what is conventional, and these influence drives the students to commit atrocities. Now this is all and good, and I think it's a very good premise to start with, and the beginning of the novel definitely hints to that. There's another passage I'd like to read that illustrates this. When Richard tries to enroll in Julian's class, at some point they have a discussion where Julian says this: I believe that having a great diversity of teachers is harmful and confusing for a young mind. So this initial picture of Julian with the description, and then this line of dialogue and his eccentric way of acting, sets him up to being somewhat of a cult leader, or to me that's how it read, because he is charismatic. First of all, he does his best to isolate his students from the rest of the university. He has this separate building. His students only take classes with him and nothing else. So he does everything in his power, and he uses his money to isolate them and create this tight group around him that follow him almost blindly. This is a great build up for what is going to happen down the line. The problem is that at some point Julian becomes completely irrelevant for the story. So you have this beginning with this great setup, but then as the story progresses, as they start to kill, you don't really feel his influence anymore. He is just mentioned that, oh, we have to go to class. He doesn't really know what happened. So when the group plans to go to another country to avoid being accused of murder, he has no idea what happened. So this leaves you wondering, how powerful is his influence really? He does include some ideas in the beginning, like the idea of the four madnesses, which I will get to. But overall, when we're in the thick of the action, he is not really aware of what's happening. And then we have the end where he leaves suddenly. I think it was supposed to be somewhat shocking because he was attached to this group. So him leaving suddenly was supposed to be somewhat shocking, but given that he wasn't relevant for almost the whole novel. What's that impact supposed to be? Okay, he's leaving. Is that going to affect the group in any way? They have another mastermind. Another problem with Julian. I'm choosing to focus on his character for this because with other characters I have other things to say. But we also have this. Towards the end, after Julian leaves, Richard says this about him. I didn't say anything. Regardless of what Julian felt for me, there was no denying that what I felt for him was love and trust of a very genuine sort. As my own parents had distanced themselves from me and more, a retreat they had been in the process of effecting for many years, it was Julian who had grown to be the sole figure of paternal benevolence in my life, which is a very moving passage. The problem is we don't see that in the interaction between Richard and Julian, where we are told Julian cares for his students and he's very involved in their life and in their well-being. But there is no moment when you actually see Richard going to Julian being vulnerable, and then Julian taking him under his wing and helping him in any way. So again, this leaves me wondering, um, what's the point? Why didn't Tartt use Julian as a character to move the story forward? Why does he build up his character in a quite well thought out manner in the beginning, just to have him be relevant until the end when he tries to bring him back? But given that most of the action happens without him anyway, why are the readers supposed to care about him? I want to move forward talking about characters and conflict. Before we get into actually analyzing the characters and the conflict between them and within them, continuing this comparison between Crime and Punishment and The Secret History, I can see how they are somewhat similar in the sense that you have a mystery novel in which the mystery is known from the very beginning. In Crime and Punishment, you know that Raskolnikov is going to kill the two women, so there's no mystery there. In The Secret History, we know from the prologue that Bunny is dead, so again, there's no mystery there. Of course, there is the mystery of how does he come to die, but the thing is, the plot is not what's supporting this novel. Like with Dostoevsky, the plot becomes basically irrelevant, which is not a bad thing as far as I'm concerned, because in my opinion, in the best novels that there are in this world, plot takes always a back seat. What's most important and most fascinating is seeing the characters interact with each other and moving on the plot. So because if you are to take Crime and Punishment, well, what happens? You have this guy. He is poor. He kills a woman to steal his money. Then he feels guilty and goes to prison. So this story could be told in 5 pages and nothing more if you were to only limit yourself to the plot. But what makes Crime and Punishment such a powerful novel is that Dostoevsky is able to go deep within the psyche of his characters and develop meaningful conflicts, and also express ideas about morality and the value of life, powerful ideas and philosophical discussions through his characters and through their conflicts, which I think Tartt tried to do as well. Because if you start your novel by revealing the huge mystery, if readers start the novel knowing it's going to happen, you need to replace that mystery with something else, and that is well-built characters and well-developed conflict that kind of move the plot forward, but also make the reader not care so much about what happens, but care about how they get there. Each criminal, let's say, has a different perspective over what they're doing. So that's what you'd expect to see. In Tartt's novel, as opposed to Dostoevsky's novel, the characters are very shallow. Even the ones that are a bit more interesting and have some more of a personality, they are still bland and mediocre at best, because they don't have any kind of idea or concept over life or over what they're doing that moves them forward and that clashes with other characters. Henry is Tartt's best attempt at building an interesting character that keeps you reading even though you know what's going to happen. And for me, and I from what I read on Goodreads and other reviews, it was the case for other people. They wanted to see more of Henry, because when he was on the page, the story felt more interesting because he is very, very smart, very intelligent. He has this mysterious charm around him, and you can guess from how he's acting that he is kind of the mastermind, not Julian. So Julian is just there to present some ideas, but Henry is actually the one that controls everybody, and you kind of get this from the beginning, I dare say, although it's not very clear. So he is very detached and has this carelessness around him that contributes to this mysterious aura that, I don't know, intrigues the reader. I also liked Start's attempt at suggesting something evil when Richard sees him talking to Francis and he associates Henry with Satan. However, at that point when Richard is saying this, I couldn't help but wonder what makes him associate Henry with Satan, because there's nothing Richard observes. Up until that point, there's nothing really he observes that indicates to him Henry has something evil within him. So what makes him make this analogy between Satan and Henry? And my guess is just that it sounds good. It's kind of a good foreshadowing, but without any substance. That's the main problem. Everything, even the good attempts, don't have any substance, because even if you have a good character, if all of the other characters around him are just bland and uninteresting and basically interchangeable one with the other, there's only so far your good character can go. And this is the problem with Bonnie as well. So Bonnie, I think, is another somewhat successful attempt at creating an interesting character in dialogue. If he's talking, even without seeing his name, you'll know that it's him. So he has this unique way of speaking, which you'd expect with in a character driven novel. But that being said, this problem of tell and not showing comes into place, because we are told Bonnie knows how to manipulate people. We are told he knows how to press the right buttons to annoy people, and we're told he knows what to say in order to hurt you in the right spot. But you don't really see this. There are some attempts, but we don't really see this, and we never see a true conflict between the group. So having a scene where they're all together and you have a fight starting because of Bonnie or whatever else, that I think that would have been a great way to show the dynamic within the group, and also showing that they're not as close as they might seem. But alas, we don't have that. So again, everything is told to us and we kind of guess it, but it has this shallowness to it, so you cannot really peel back layers and find something deep within, like you can do with Dostoevsky, for example. Yes, you have Raskolnikov's character, but then you can peel back the character layer and see all of those discussions about how important is life. Are some people more important than the others? Are we entitled to taking someone's life just because we maybe are more important than them, and so on? With the secret history, you cannot really do that, because the characters are kind of like masks, but once you take the masks off, there's nothing behind it. And this brings me to the rest of the characters, and I will try to go through them quite shortly because there's nothing much to say really. Aside from Henry and Bonnie, which are two of the developed ones, we have Francis. His personality is that he's the gay one, and he has an addict mother. We don't really see how this influences him, his perspective over life. He's just the gay one that wants to randomly sleep with Richard because he has nothing better to do. I wouldn't call that a personality trait. Then we have Charles, which has no personality until the end when he becomes the alcoholic one. Although you could argue that all of them are alcoholic, and again, being alcoholic doesn't really count as a personality trait either. We have Camilla, which is the only female character within the group. She's also very boring, if not the most boring out of all of them, because the only thing she has going for her is that she's very beautiful and everybody loves her for some reason. She is very beautiful and she seems very innocent, but actually she's cunning and she's using her beauty to manipulate people and twist them on her fingers, which is okay, sure, maybe a little bit sexist, but I'm open to seeing it. The problem is you never see it, so everybody loves her for some reason, but you never see her cunningness. You don't really get why would she be this way? What makes her want to be so manipulative and want to use her beauty to control people? Because again, going back to Crime and Punishment, when characters do things in Crime and Punishment, you understand why. Even though they do stupid things, you have a man that basically drinks his family into poverty, and then he dies and his family is left on the street, but you get what why he's doing this. You're still annoyed at him, but you understand what are the motivations behind it. There you also have a character that's very manipulative. He's a man, but he's very manipulative, and I don't know, he's despicable in my opinion. But still, you can understand why he's acting this way. He has a reason behind it, and again, you can go beyond the mask of the character and see what makes him interact and act the way he does. In Tartt's novel, however, especially with Camilla, you don't really see that. What makes her want to manipulate people? What does she get out of it? Nothing much. I mean, you could argue this is the only thing she has going for her. Maybe because she is not confident in her intellectual capabilities, so she's using her beauty. But then again, she's in Julian's class, so and we know that Julian is very selective. So being in that class is a testament to her intelligence, and we're told that she is intelligent. So and there's no, again, if we were to go on that route, or maybe she's not confident in her intellectual capabilities, there's nothing much to suggest this in the novel anyway. So you're left wondering what's the point of Camilla, and quite annoyed given that she is well, she's not the only female character, but she's the only female character in the group. You'd expect her to have something different as opposed to the others, especially given how the Greeks saw women, which was not in a very favorable light, if I may add. So you'd expect something more interesting to be done with her, but no, nothing else. The shortness of the characters brings me to the Greek influence that we're supposed to see in the novel. So, as I said at the beginning, you have Julian in, I think, the only lecture Richard tells us about. He talks about Plato's four madnesses. That is taken from one of Plato's dialogues called Phaedrus. I think I'm maybe mispronouncing it, but anyway, so he's talking about this. He's also presenting the idea of beauty being terror. Very interesting idea that I thought, okay, maybe I was mistaken. I can see how these can be integrated in what happens afterwards, and trying to justify murder through this perspective that beauty is terror and creating terror, or maybe having the characters represent one of these four, each character representing one of these four madnesses, and then the conflict coming from that because each of them are driven by a different ideal, so to say. That doesn't really happen. As I told you, the characters are very bland, so they don't have any kind of idea and concept behind them that makes them act in the way they do, and then makes them crash with each other to create any kind of conflict. Then another interesting idea I found in this dialogue, which is not presented in the novel, but I thought it could have been a good starting point, and I think it offers a good perspective from which you can analyze the characters in the novel. So Plato says, not Plato, I think it's Socrates, because Socrates is the main character in Plato's dialogues. But he says people are ruled by two principles, and you have inborn desire for pleasure, and then the judgment to pursue what is right. And this is, if you were to take it, this, I think this is it's a very common conflict in literature, but this is because it appeals to something very universal in human beings. So we all have this conflict between what we like, what we desire, and what we know is right. And this could have been a very interesting conflict to develop within the characters and then project it outward. However, if you are to analyze characters from this perspective, you are left grasping at pieces that don't really fall together. We don't know what Camilla desires. Maybe desires to be with Henry, but this is something that appears towards the end of the book. Charles, what does he do? Does he desire to be with Camilla? You can say that, but if you're trying to find evidence of it in the novel, There's not much to support your idea. You could maybe see Henry and Bonnie as Bonnie being the desire of what's pleasurable, Henry being judgment to pursue what's right. But then again, if you go towards the end, you'll see that that's not what Henry is about. He seeks to satisfy his own desire, which is to transcend his body and get out of his mind in a way. So that's what he wants. So again, why is Plato relevant for this book? Why do we have so many mentions of Greek mythology? You also have other name drops like Tolstoy and Dostoevsky, which I found quite, again, they're just to show, oh, I know about them and they're smart authors. So if I mention their name and you know who they are, you're also smart, but without any substance behind it. Towards the end, you have conflict and kind of love triangle between Henry, Camilla, and Charles, which I would say on paper it could make for an intriguing reveal. The problem is, again, you don't have anything throughout the novel to build up to that. It's just something that's dropped on you, and to me, it felt like Tartt was trying to do her best to make this book as long as possible, so it can be seen as a classic. It's a big book, so you have to be smart to read such a big book, which I thought it was quite kind of a cheap trick and unnecessary. Because if she was confident in her characters and the conflict that she built between them up until that point, she wouldn't need to bring up this layer of incestuous love and of this love triangle between Henry, Camilla, and Charles. Because you could have a conflict between Charles and Henry, given that they are the only two questioned by the police and the FBI. So this creates a lot of tension, especially since they have a different approach to the interview, and you have them clashing in this way. Of course, we don't see it because we see everything from Richard's perspective, and we don't really know what happens in the questioning. But that's another problem, and I'll get to Richard in a bit. So you already have a conflict between them. You don't need them to make them rivals for Camilla. And as for Camilla, I think, again, if she would have been a well built and developed character, having a conflict between her love, her romantic love for Henry, and her sisterly connection and disconnect, especially since they're twins, you could have implied some kind of a more deeper connection, maybe even telepathic. So having a conflict between the person she loves as a lover and the person she loves as a brother and as a twin could make for a good enough conflict to create tension and action. But of course, since you have characters that are so bland and conflicts that are basically non-existent, because if you don't have a character with motivations, you don't have conflicts. Of course, Tartt needs to add this layer of oh, they are basically fighting for the same girl, so that is what makes them hate each other, which to me felt like a cheap trick. One, to create tension because there wasn't any, and two, to extend the book a few pages more to reach that 600-page mark and put it up with the big books. Because this novel didn't need to be 600 pages, in my opinion. It could have been half this length, and you wouldn't lose any essential parts of it, as far as I'm concerned. And going back to the idea of a love triangle and romantic relationships, to be honest, the way it was built, I would have expected some kind of romantic relationship between Henry and Bonnie, or at least coming from Henry, because even before he tries to bribe Bonnie in order to stay silent about the murder, Henry does all of these things without really having to. When Bonnie and Richard go to the restaurant and Bonnie doesn't have money to pay, even though he said that the check is going to be on him, he calls Henry to pay, and Henry pays without saying anything. We are told that there is a kind of deep relationship between them, and that Henry has some sort of affection towards Bonnie. Of course, we don't really see why. So again, we don't understand why Henry does this for Bonnie. What draws Henry towards Edmund? You don't really see what's the drive behind the actions, which again doesn't make for a good character driven book. Everything is just this facade of references that makes it sound deep, but if you are to go with the reference and trying to see what's the reason behind it, you see that the only reason is to make you feel smart and deep without having any substance behind it. This brings me to my last part from my analysis, and that is the narrator. I would say it's a bold move to choose an outsider as a narrator, because it's difficult to make the story interesting when the narrator is not included in the main action of the novel. Because all the time you have this feeling of Richard being an outsider. So as a reader, you're left wondering, or you're left thinking, I would prefer if I had Henry's perspective rather than Richard's, who is just sits in his room when when the stuff happens. But I don't think it's necessarily a bad choice, because being this outsider, Richard can get more of a landscape view of the dynamic between the group. So he has a unique perspective, and it could make for a very interesting narrator. However, we don't really get to see this. Okay, you make him an outsider. Okay, he's not there for the action, but make him be there for the fallout. Make him see the conflict between the group. Make him be present for the fights, and maybe have him not understanding exactly what they're fighting about, but have him tell us about the fight and let the reader figure out what they're fighting about. That could be very interesting thing to see, to have Richard reproducing these dialogues for us without him understanding what's behind this conflict, but having us as the readers know what happens, and then us expecting to see Richard come in the know as well. But you don't really have that. So because he's an outsider, so he says, I don't know what happened, or I don't remember. That's something that really annoyed me. So having his perspective, having him as an outsider, I think again does more of a disservice to the novel than adding something to it, and not because he's an outsider, but because Tartt wasn't able to build him as a convincing and compelling narrator. Another problem with Richard as a narrator is that he as a character is again pretty bland and mediocre. As opposed to others, there are some palpable conflicts we can identify in him. So first, the conflict between him and his parents wanting him to pursue a profitable field like medicine, and him wanting to go and study classics, which is of course something for rich people. Him wanting to be rich, so wanting to climb the social ladder, and having this conflict between social classes is another interesting conflict. But these again, they're not explored, and they're not shown in the way he talks, he interacts, he acts. He's just there to kind of relate to us what happens, but he doesn't do a good job either. He's not that interesting. The worst thing is when a character doesn't give you any kind of reaction. So you can have a character be very likable and you want to love him, want the best for him, or you can have a character that's very annoying and you just want to slap him. Both of these are better than having a character that just leaves you like, eh. The last thing I don't like about Richard being an unreliable narrator is the fact that I've seen some people deflect criticism through the lens of him being unreliable by saying, well, we cannot really know that what he's saying is true. Maybe he made the whole thing up, so don't try to analyze it so much. Even when you have an unreliable narrator, you can have them see and observe things that they don't understand, but you as a reader understand. And when you choose your narrator, you kind of want to choose a person who is able to have some sort of different insight, or some special characteristic that makes him be a good storyteller at the end of the day, because Richard really isn't. So, and his story he tells, if we were to entertain this idea of everything in this book is just made up by Richard and it's not really happened this way, well, it's not a good story, and you'd expect the story to be kind of too perfect to be true. That would be a giveaway for him making the whole thing up. But there's nothing really in this story to support this idea that everything we read about is just Richard's imagination. If we start from the first thing, he says that he has a weakness for the picturesque. This is not a very picturesque story in my opinion, because there are a lot of hanging pieces that just don't connect to each other. So it's not an aesthetically pleasing story. If he makes the whole things up, why does he constantly paint himself as the outsider? And that's not even something that, oh, he doesn't know he's an outsider, but we see it. No, he knows it. He's left out of basically everything important that happens in the novel. Why doesn't he develop his relationship with Camilla more? Why does he have her reject him? So there are all of these questions that if you start asking him, it doesn't make sense for the story to be just Richard's imagination. I'm not saying that there isn't a possibility that he made some things up, but it still doesn't make the book good. So even if you are to look at it from this perspective, it still doesn't make the book good. It still doesn't explain why the characters are so bland. It still doesn't make up for the lack of conflict between them. Even Richard, you would expect Richard to have some clashing ideas with Henry or with Bunny, but he's just there kind of trying to fit in, but he really doesn't. His relationship with Henry, when Henry finds him in that room with the broken roof almost dying, that part after Henry takes him in, it's very interesting. And again, I was thinking, oh, maybe there's a relation, there's going to be a relationship developed between them. Again, expecting some kind of, if not erotic, some kind of deeper relationship between Henry and Richard or Bonnie, but not Henry and Camilla. That's for sure. Even so, everything is just surface level. If you want to peel back, like you can do with Raskolnikov, if you want to peel back the layer of the character and see what are the ideas each character represents, how are they clashing, you cannot really find anything. There's somewhat suggested that Henry is evil. You could have this discussion of, well, are people born evil? Are they made evil? Is there a difference between them? Again, there's nothing you're left with when it comes to these more deeper discussions, or even talking about the beauty. Is beauty terror? Is beauty a good enough excuse to murder someone? How is this pursuit of beauty taking way too far? Well, they don't really take the pursuit of beauty too far, because they don't really do it for beauty, but they do it for this kind of transcending experience and out of body experience. It all leaves you feeling meh at the end. You're trying, or at least as far as I'm concerned, I was trying to find something deep within the novel, and in the end my conclusion is that it's just a mainstream novel. It's a pretty catchy story, I'll give her that, but it's not deep, deep story that underlines some kind of discussion about life, about humanity, about beauty, or any other concept. It's just a mystery book uh, that was placed in this kind of setting to make it sound more smart than it is. So this is my analysis, and I hope I kept it somewhat objective. Of course, I have my biases. I'm not going to pretend that this is the ultimate analysis, and nothing I said was subjective in any way. It's just poor facts, because it's at the end of the day, it's still fiction. It's still art, and art, as much as you're going to try analyzing art, will still have some degree of subjectivity to it, but I try to keep it as, I don't know, impartial as possible. Now, before I end, there are some things that bug me about the university setting. First is that they don't really do a whole lot of studying. They do a whole lot of drinking, a whole lot of hanging around, but not a lot of studying, which you'd expect, because they are supposed to be quite smart, and you get the sense in the beginning that yes, they are eccentric, they are misfits, but they also have a higher intellectual capability when compared to the others. So you'd expect them to be more interested in studying, but they're not, except for Henry. You also have them at some point copying an assignment, which I thought very unrealistic, given first that you have only 6 students in the class, so copying from each other would be very obvious. And secondly, you have Julian, which is painted as this very sensitive person that's very receptive to each student's individuality. So I would expect, even if they don't have the same assignment, even if they say Henry creates 6 assignments for each one, you still expect Julian to pick up on that, but he doesn't. So that I found quite annoying. There's no sort of discussion about what they're reading. So again, you'd expect them to study these Greek works and then discuss them and having debate on and different interpretations. Again, that can reveal something about how each character thinks and how their ideas clash, but you have nothing of that, so that's something else that bugged me. In conclusion, I would say this novel has a lot of hints to things that could be smart, that could be interesting, that could be intriguing, that could tell something unique about the concept of beauty, the concept of evil. But that's all they are. They are hints, they are sketches, they are kind of outlines that you are left to fill in. And if you are someone who is not, let's say, very experienced, and I don't want this to come across as I don't know, elitist, or as me believing that I'm in somewhat superior, but if you don't have any kind of experience with these texts, I would see why you'd think that this novel must have something special, because it has these references to works that are not widely known by people. But if you do know a little, and I'm not pretending I'm an expert. So my major was in English literature, my minor was in Italian, so I'm by no means an expert in classics, or haven't studied them seriously, but I have had some contact with them. So even with my limited experience of classics, you can see behind that facade, and you're left wondering what is so smart about this book. Just because you name drop things, that doesn't make you smart. Just because you hint at maybe something, this could be something, and if you'd know about it, you'd understand. But if you don't, then you'll just have to take my word for it. Doesn't make it smart. So at the end of the day, this is still a mainstream book compared to other mainstream books, a masterpiece compared to the big classics. This doesn't really fit in there, because it's nothing more than a novel that creates an aesthetic, the whole aesthetic of dark academia, but without any kind of substance behind it. Credit where credit is due. There is some skill in this, because as boring as it is catchy at the same time. There was still something keeping me wanting to read it, even if it was boring. Because there was constantly that promise of something interesting is going to happen. I just have to read this chapter, and then something interesting is going to happen. I just have to get over Richard's shenanigans, and then something interesting is going to happen. Next time Henry is going to appear, something interesting is going to happen. So you're constantly kept with this promise of something is going to happen, which isn't really fulfilled, but it does keep you going. So I'll give her that. I think it takes some skill to achieve that, but still, I wouldn't say this is a good book if you were to compare it to the classics, and I definitely wouldn't call it a modern classic. However, I am somewhat intrigued by Tartt as a writer, so I might try to read some of her other works. Maybe they are better. Maybe she tried to bite off more than she could chew with this novel, and having this ambition of making it a classic without having anything actually wanted to say, because it gives this impression. It gives the impression that she wanted to uh, to place herself next to classic authors, but without having really anything of substance to say. Which is a harsh critic, but anyway. However, I am interested in trying to read some of her other novels, because I see some potential there, and maybe I can find some other works of her that I would like more. But with The Secret History, my final verdict after having read it, having thought about it, I will say that it doesn't hold up to scrutiny when you compare it to works like Crime and Punishment. Now, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm sorry if I offended you. Again, I have nothing against you if you like this novel, um, but I do have something against advertising it as a modern classic and as a masterpiece. and putting it next to Dostoevsky. That is something I take very personally. If you care to leave me your impressions in the comments, I would really like that. I would like to see what you think. Thank you for watching. I don't know what my next video is gonna be, so I'm not going to make any promises. This was it. Thank you for watching. Bye.